Well, it's so good to have you here this morning. I hope that you're excited about being in church. I'm glad that you've chosen to brave the warm weather and make it to church. That's a great thing to be here today with us to worship our Lord and Savior as we start this new series entitled The Good Life. And I just got to share this, as Mike kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but we had a group of fourth and fifth graders, some little guys that went over to, here in Dallas, went over to a conference of about a little over 1,000 people, 1,000 kids, fourth and fifth grade kids, in a room like this one. And just to share in a conversation in their life, just to be exposed to God's word and challenged to share their story wherever they may go. And I got to say this, that our church was well represented there. We had a lot of opportunities there, but two of our kids from Valley View got called to the stage. And they made it all the way up onto the stage in front of all their peers and without any reservations, because children are like that, right? They were put in front of the audience and just said, hey, we're going to do a little Fortnite dance-off challenge. All right? And I'll say this, both of the two young people from our church came out victorious, which says a lot about our genetics as a church. And so I want to share with you just a little bit of that story. Here it is on video. Their names are Darren and Emma. They got it going this way.
Everyone say, what up, what up, what up, what up? 3, 2, 1. Go. Oh. Okay. What?
Well, yeah. You can give them a big hand. That is what is known as the good life. And I know that it's genetic, so their parents are with us today. And if you want to see them dance later, you can come to that. We might actually have a dance challenge, a Fortnite. If you don't know what Fortnite is, find somebody younger and ask them, okay? Maybe we'll put Chad against Joel on Wednesday night out in the lobby. Don't know about that one, but we'll see. Listen, I know this, though. We all have our own definition of the good life in our head, right? You have a version of what the good life is supposed to look like, what your version of. Maybe it's waterfront property. Maybe it's a house in the woods. Maybe it's a high-rise condo. I don't know what it is for you. Maybe it's a corner office. That would be the good life. Maybe it's a better health. Maybe it's more wealth. I don't know what your vision of the good life is, but I know that you have one. You have a version. And literally, that version is the culmination of when we put two English words together. And they're two of the most dangerous words that you could put together in the English language. It is the words, if only. If only. Think about that, because that's where your version came from. You think about what happens if only. Like what could start? What could stop? Where if only has led you? Where if only has prevented you? See, the good life, the if only is literally what we see in our minds, but we're not sure quite how to get there. It's what we want, but we literally have no idea how it's going to happen. It kind of lives that if only kind of vision for the good life kind of resides in that category of want and desire, doesn't it? It's where literally in your mind, it's probably the greatest chasm that you have to cross. It's the greatest space that you have to jump over in order to have that good life. Because we're convinced, I believe this more than anything, all the conversations I've had in life with people, we're convinced that if only is what separates us from the good life. If only I was thinner, then I'd have a good life. If only I could dance, then I'd have a good life. If only the kids would come home occasionally, like if the kids would go away occasionally, then I'd have a good life, right? Like if only I could leave home. If literally only I could move away from home. If I could get married. If only I was no longer married. If only my skin would just clear up. If only my calendar would not be so full of people. If my job didn't suffer layoffs, if only. Then I would have the good life. Doesn't it seem like the good life is just always, it's elusive, isn't it? It's just one if only away. One purchase away, one promotion away, one election away, one transaction away, one romance away, just literally one step away. And that's why you work long hours and you borrow more money and literally you take on new projects and you just pile on the responsibilities and that in turn occurs in our life, and we have more stress and we have more debt and we have shorter nights and longer days. All at the cost of a good life. What our version is. Friday, I took Ruth Ann through the drive-thru at Starbucks. I think that's her version of a good life. I'm more of a Sonic person myself. But as I was driving through there, I listened to the people in front of us order through their car into this little box, and they talk back to you. You know how it works. And as I was sitting there, I thought, well, wonder what it would be like if only we could order our life like we order coffee, right? I don't go to Starbucks hardly ever, but I don't even understand the terminology that they use most of the time while we're there. But if you could just say, give me a tall, I don't know what the word they use, give me a tall, extra hot cup of adventure. A lot of danger. Maybe just why don't you put some shots of good health in there? Like what if you could just give me a decaf brew of longevity where you could sprinkle in some fertility, maybe go heavy on the agility and a whole lot less on the disability. Or maybe when you're ordering, you could say, just give me one of those pleasure mochas, right? Just stir in some indulgence and kind of go light on the consequences of life. What if, I think the word is grande. Could you just give me one of those grande happy lattes thing? Put a dollop of love in there and sprinkle it with a whole lot of Caribbean retirement. Like, isn't that what you think? And listen, as we kind of drive through life, we have these expectations of the way life should turn out. And usually, though, our priorities get all turned out of order and our direction gets blurred. One day, Jesus was sitting with some of his followers. And he took them up onto a mountainside in Matthew chapter 5. And we've been in Matthew chapter 5 last fall in 2018. I want to finish this sermon series this way. But he pulled them up on a mountainside to describe what his view, his version of the good life is for those of us who follow him. And literally in the life of Jesus, it's the life, as he describes it, it's literally the life that we dream. It's the life that we seek. It's a life that's flourishing. It's a life that's literally indistinguishable among everyone else, right? But here's what I want you to know this morning, that in order to have the life that Jesus is going to describe, in order to have the life that Jesus wants you to have, you're going to need to give up the life you think you should have. Let me say that again. In order for you to have the life that Jesus wants you to have, chances are really high that you're going to have to give up the life that you think you should have. And maybe more importantly, you're going to have to be convinced that the life that Jesus is going to describe for us in this sermon, you're going to have to be convinced that that's the life that you're supposed to have. So my question this morning is pretty simple. Are you convinced? Are you convinced that the Christian life is the good life? Like deep down. Are you convinced that the Christian life is the good life? And in order to wrap or to get this thing in your head, I want you to think about all of the teachings that the very first Christians on the planet had to embrace in order to be convinced that, yes, that's the good life. Think about all the things that Jesus would say while he was on earth that they would have to literally embrace in order to be convinced that, yes, I will follow him. I will give my life to him. I know that he has my best interest at heart. That is the good life. Like literally, if we could go back in time to 64 AD, that's about 30 years after Jesus has risen from the dead and gone back into heaven. About 64 AD, a guy by the name of Nero is in charge of the Roman Empire. The Roman emperor, his name is Nero, and he literally burns the city of Rome to the ground. Think about that. His place of living. He burns it to the ground. He burns literally 10 out of the 14 districts in Rome. That's like taking 10 of the suburbs around us and just burning them to the ground. He started a fire because he had a dream. He had a dream of what Rome should look like, that it shouldn't have poverty, so I'm going to burn it to the ground. It shouldn't have certain sections of the city looking like the way it does, so I'm going to burn it to the ground. So he sets this fire, and the fire gets out of control. And when it gets out of control, you know this, whenever you do something, somebody notices. So he has to have an answer. He needs a scapegoat. So what he does is he decides to blame it on this new Jewish knockoff. They call themselves Christians. And so he announces that Christians are the ones who burn the city down. And he sends out his henchmen, he sends out his warriors into the city to round up everybody who's labeled as a Christian. He has an arena at his house. It's literally called the Nero Circus. And as he gathers these Christians up, he begins, you know this from history, he begins to burn them at the stake. He begins to feed them to lions. He begins to make sport out of their life, literally taking their life from them. He starts to persecute Christians. Now, imagine if we could go back to that era, that time, in 64 AD, and we go to the city of Rome, and we don't go into the city, we stay on the outskirts of the city, and we find this little farmhouse. And behind the farmhouse, there's a barn, and we open up the barn doors, and we walk in, and we discover that there's 3 Christian families that have fled the city of Rome. They know that they can never go back to the city because of the label, because of what they're professing to follow and who they're professing to follow. They've lost everything that they have. And if anyone finds out they're Christian, you know what's going to happen. They're going to be dragged back into the city. They're going to be dragged back into the residence of Nero, into Nero's circus, and they're going to be persecuted. Most likely, they'll be put to death. But as we open up those doors to where they're hiding, if only they knew what we know now, right? If only we could convince them of what we know now. Like if we sat down on a hay bale just across from these frightened families, and their children are crying, and the fathers are a little bit scared, and they don't know what to do, and we asked them, did you know? I don't know if you know this or not, but in just a matter of time, in just a few years from now, one day this movement that you're a part of, that you're choosing to believe in, one day this movement I know this is just the beginning. But one day, this movement will be worldwide. It will be internationally known. You will no longer have to hide here. One day, this city of Rome that you've literally fled from. Think about this. One day, this cross that's become the symbol of your movement, it's not going to be a representation of the empire of Rome and all the crucifixions that they've committed against people. No, it's going to be a symbol of this one singular crucifixion of a man that you've placed your faith in, where Christ's followers are being persecuted for. Like this cross is going to represent that one single crucifixion of the Jewish carpenter, the very man that you're choosing to worship, that you're choosing to follow. Can you imagine if we told him, one day the city that you're fleeing from, where Nero lives and where Christ's followers are being persecuted, one day there will literally be crosses all over the landscape of Rome, because Rome, it will all be in memory of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Like in that same city, can you imagine what would run through their minds? They would think that you're crazy. They would think that we've lost it, that we're a fool. Because in their minds, Rome was forever. Nero's the most powerful man on the planet. And yes, they would say, yes, we believe in Jesus, the Messiah. Yes, we know that the carpenter is really God's son. Yes, we know that Jesus is actually the Savior of our sins. But this is a small movement. This isn't that big. We're only, literally, think of it this way. We're only a few people in a large room in a very large city. And there's no way in the world that Rome's ever going to turn itself upside down and surrender to this young movement. But literally within a few hundred years, which is historically not a long time, Rome becomes the very epicenter of Christianity. How did that happen? How did that happen? How did that take place? Let me tell you how it didn't happen. It didn't happen because these Christians stayed scared, hidden in a room, continuing to meet, but in fear. It didn't happen because these Jewish followers just decided to listen to sermons. It happened because these followers of Jesus literally embraced the very teachings of Jesus at such a significant level that they literally took on the labels and the brands. They literally embraced the routines of everything that Jesus said on a mountainside one day. And over time, think about this, it changed the world. All because they were convinced. All because they were convicted by what they chose to believe in. I want to read this morning that speech on the mountainside that day that got everything going. Speech that everyone kind of rallied around, the speech that was the beginning of the movement, like where hundreds, maybe perhaps thousands of people had gathered that day on the mountain. Jesus realizes as he's sitting down on this mountain that this is a big moment. That this is the time where he's going to unveil and unpack everything that's going to take place in the future. This is the beginning of change. This is going to be a value system. This is going to be a worldview that these people are going to have to adopt. These are going to be the habits and the routines and the behaviors that are going to turn the world upside down. And listen, quite frankly, that's the reason why you're here. It's the reason why I'm here today. This little speech, this little sermon. Matthew, the gospel writer, he records it this way, where it all began. Notice this. It says this in chapter 5 of Matthew, starting with verse 1. It says this. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside. That's why we call it Sermon on the Mount. And he sat down, and his disciples, what? They came to him, and he began to teach them. Like, this is going to be revolutionary. This is going to be world changing. This is going to affect your life if you choose to follow it. And he says these words. It's like a coach on Super Bowl Sunday. What are they going to say to challenge the people to rise up? Notice what Jesus tells them. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Like, there you go. Doesn't that change your life? Doesn't that get you all excited? Jesus, is that all? No, there's more. He said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Like Jesus, really? That's all you got? That's a motivating factor for us? He said this, blessed are the meek. In other words, blessed are the gentle, blessed are the humble, blessed are those who are considerate of others. Blessed are the meek, for they will what? They will inherit the earth. Like Jesus, I got a question. Can I just interrupt you, Jesus? I just got a question. Like meek? Like really? Like, are you from around here, Jesus? Like, have you really thought through what you're saying? Do you know it's not? You know what's going on in the world? Meek, to be meek. You know anything about Rome? Like, we haven't had freedom around here for hundreds of years, and you're asking us to be meek. Do you know where our meekness has gotten us? Do you know where our meekness might get us? Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will what? They will inherit the earth." Jesus, like, do you know we can't even control our own land? We can't control our own nation. We're not in control. How do you ever think that we're going to control and inherit the earth? Then he says this, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Filled with what? Righteousness. And he said, blessed are the merciful. Man, that's going to get them right. You don't walk out into this world and think, I'm just going to give mercy on everybody. Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for what? For they will be called the children of God. Jesus, I got another question. Peacemakers. Do you really think that we're going to be able to retake the world and retake our land and retake our nation and retake our community through keeping the peace? Like, do you know what happens to people who try to keep the peace with Rome? They get devoured. They get swallowed up. They get taken and destroyed. Like Jesus, are you sure this is what you want to say to us? And Jesus kind of turns to Matthew and says, Matthew, are you writing this down? And I can almost see Matthew going, I'm not sure I should write this down because this really isn't going the way you think it's going. Like, you sure you want me to say this and write this down because you think people are going to sign up for this? And then Jesus finishes that section this way. He said, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. And how many of you would sign up? Like, how many would go, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Sign me up. I'm convinced. Like, people in the audience were probably thinking, I hope he does a miracle because his miracles are much better than his sermons. Right? Jesus, before you go on, is this really what you think this is the good life? We're supposed to be poor and meek and merciful and righteous and peaceful and persecuted and insulted. We're supposed to just wait around for our reward in heaven? Jesus, are you sure? Is that really who we are as your children? Like, we're really supposed to be sad and meek and righteous and poor and merciful and pure and peaceful and persecuted and insulted, just waiting around for that reward. Jesus, do you really think like this is going to catch on? Maybe Jesus kind of laughed. I don't know. Maybe he kind of smiled under his face. I don't know. But I do know this, that they just didn't know the future that Jesus knew. They didn't know that within a few hundred years that the message of Jesus would literally be everywhere. Everywhere. And Jesus continues. He says, Matthew, I need you to write this down. Because I'm going to give my people, people that sign up for this, the people that are convinced, I'm going to give them 2 word pictures of who they really are. Let me just tell you who you are, Jesus said. And he gives us 2 things, and they're going to be really practical for you, is what Jesus was thinking. He says this in verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. I've been called a lot of things in my life. Salt of the earth. And you know this, everybody in the audience that day knew what salt was because salt is universal. You can go anywhere on the earth and recognize that salt is universal. Salt is in abundance around the world. As a matter of fact, you can Google salt and there's 14,000 different uses for salt. because it flavors things and it heals things, and yes, it purifies things, and it stings at times. But salt was precious in the days of Jesus. Matter of fact, it was so valuable that Roman soldiers were literally given a stipend, or they received a salt allowance for their pay. That's where we get the word salary. It meant payment in salt. So today, when people aren't pulling their weight at work, we say things like, they're not worth their salt. Like, this is a very strong indication of what Jesus thinks of us as being precious and valuable. But maybe what Jesus was trying to get at more than anything is that salt is a preservative. Salt was a preservative. And of course they didn't have refrigeration, but you know this, a preservative is something that you add to food to prevent decomposition. Like when there's no preservative, things decompose. When there's no preservative, things rot. When there's no preservative, things begin to smell and stink. And here's what Jesus is saying to his audience. Here's what Jesus is literally saying to you and I today. You are the preservative of the entire earth. You are the preservative. Like, if you don't preserve, the earth is going to rot. Culture is going to stink. Things are going to go in a very, very negative way. And just imagine, put yourself on the mountainside that day. Imagine the world in which Jesus was speaking. People, think of it this way. People didn't do the right thing because it was the right thing to do. Because in their culture, we think that way because we're on this side of the earth. They didn't think that way because they were in that time frame. He was speaking to a world where might made right. That he was speaking to a world where the right thing to do was determined by the strength and the power of your army. Like the right thing to do. Moral issues were not necessarily moral issues. Ethical issues were not necessarily ethical issues. It was whoever had the longest sword, the sharpest sword, whoever had the strongest arms. That's why women had no rights. That's why children had no rights. That's why mercy and compassion and generosity, those weren't virtues of the day. Those were for the weak cultures of their time. It was a world that you and I as Americans have a hard time imagining, because there was no common courtesy, there was no human decency. Like, as Americans, if you don't realize this, as Americans, we have learned those things. You've been taught those things. We literally reflect these fundamental teachings of Jesus as American citizens. His teachings have gone around the world and transformed cultures wherever they go. That's why people who are convinced that women shouldn't be treated less than men, people are convinced of that. That a person should never own another person. That's why slavery, there's something wrong about slavery. And yes, there was a time as a nation that we kind of didn't live according to the teachings of Jesus, but eventually our social conscience, our national conscience caught up with the reality of the teachings of Jesus, and we changed our way of thinking, we hope. Think about that children are precious. Where did that come from? And especially in a world in which there are so many cultures in which children are not considered to be precious. Why do we think that when someone is generous, that's good? That when someone chooses to give in order to help someone, that's seen as good instead of weak? Why do we think that compassion is so great? Why do we applaud mercy? Why do we celebrate kindness? Why do we hold up on pedestals those people who risk their lives in order to benefit someone else? You realize that it's an underlying belief system that literally exploded because of this teaching of Jesus. And first century Christians, first century believers, first century brothers and sisters, they literally grabbed hold of this teaching of Jesus, and they held on, and they believed it, and they were convinced of it. And Jesus said to the crowd that day, "No, you're the salt of the earth. You might not have any political standing. You might not have any financial standing. You may have no one noticing or paying attention to you whatsoever. But listen, literally, if you are not the salt of the earth is going to rot. If you think it's bad now, like if you give up being salt, as a believer, can you imagine how bad things would be if Christians weren't here? Think about that. We benefit every single day from a worldview that says that men and women and children are made in the image of a heavenly Father. We hear about things like human trafficking. We recognize that people are bought and sold in slavery every day in other countries. We know that really unbelievably, incredibly poor things happen to children around the world as they're bought and sold. And we think, how in the world can anyone treat somebody like that? You should know this, that not everyone sees the world the way that you've been taught to see the world. And it's because you've been taught to see the world the way that you do, through Jesus, that we learned about a personal Father who loves us and interacts with us and calls us his child. And we learn from him that people have value and people have worth. And I better be careful how I treat you. You better be careful how you treat me. Because Jesus said this one day, one of the most powerful things that he said is that all people everywhere are going to know that you're my follower. They're going to know you're my follower. They're going to know that you're convinced of following Jesus based on how you love, based on how you treat, based on how you appreciate, based on how you care for people. Jesus said, listen carefully, Jesus said, that's the good life. That's the good life. And if you allow it to, it's going to take hold of you, and you will become the salt of the earth. You will become the preserver of someone else's life. But Jesus also said this one, that same day, the next sentence he said this, you're the light of the world. You're the light of the world, to which I think you and I respond this way. I don't want to be the light of the world. I don't want to be the light of the world. I just want to be a Christian. I just want to be able to go to church and then go to heaven when I die. I don't want to be the light of the world. I don't want that, Jesus. I don't want to be light. I don't want to be salt. I just want to live my life, raise my family. I want to go to work. I want to maybe have a few of my dreams come true, but then I want to go to heaven when I die. Can I just ask you something? Who taught you that? Who taught you that? Because you're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. And listen, do you know how big the world was to those people sitting in the audience that day? The world was actually pretty small as a group of people to them, mentally. It was a small world. No one traveled literally more than probably about 15 miles from their home. They didn't know about North America or South America. They didn't know that certain continents that have now been discovered even existed. But they certainly didn't think that churches would be on those continents based on what Jesus was saying that day. Because Jesus was so serious when he said this, you are the light of the world. And he goes on in Matthew chapter 5, he says this. He says, a town built on a hill cannot be hidden. A better translation of that Greek term is the word placed. A town placed on a hill, because it's more intentional. A town placed on a hill cannot be hidden. That part of the world is mostly flat. There's a few hills here and there. There's not a lot of tall trees. It's mostly shrubs. But they built their towns on hills, and they built their buildings out of white limestone so that when you were a distance away, you could see the sun reflecting off the white limestone, and you knew that that's where a town was. And at night, they would light their oil lamps, and they'd put them in their windows or in their houses, and it would literally light the world for miles around. You could see them. And Jesus said this, just as a city or a town on a hill cannot be hidden, that's what you are. You are a strategically placed city. You are a strategically placed town. That's why you are the light of the world. You have been strategically placed here. To which you and I probably respond to Jesus most days, no, I'm not. No, I'm not, Jesus. I'm not strategically placed. I was transferred here from California. I got here from Oklahoma. I came here from Kentucky or Indiana or maybe all the way from Africa like Darren. I maybe from one of the islands. I'm not strategically placed here. I no way, Jesus. If only I could go back home, I would go back home. And it may seem random to you when Jesus says, no, you are strategically placed here like a light on a hill. No, I'm not. I was dating this guy. We moved to Dallas and then he dumped me, and now I'm just trying to earn enough money to get back home. I don't want to be here. Jesus says, no. If you're my follower, you are a light. And it may seem very random to you, but you are strategically placed right where you are. And then he said this, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand. And it gives light to everyone in the house in the same way. Like a city placed on a hill, like a lamp placed on a stand. In the same way, let your light shine before others. And you know how we want to finish this verse? In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your church attendance and say, wow, he's a good Christian. I go to church, I'm going to heaven. I don't want to be salt. I don't want to be light. I don't want anybody to notice me. I just want to be a Christian, do my thing, go to church. I came to church today. I might come back next week if Joe won't keep talking about this kind of stuff. Maybe. That's how we read this. But can I just say this? Do you know how Jesus finished this? Notice what Jesus said to this group of people who literally went nowhere, who didn't go anywhere, who literally had very little of anything. This is what Jesus said. In the same way, let your light shine before other people that they may see your good deeds and what? And glorify your Father who is in heaven. Jesus said, I want you to live your life in such a way that when people see your good deeds, they don't just simply go, wow, that guy's a nice guy. No, rather, he says, I want them to see your good deeds and say things like this. Are you kidding me? Do you know how good that guy is? That guy is so generous. That guy is so nice. They keep bringing me food every time I'm sick. I don't understand why they do this. I hardly even know them. I've noticed, too, that some of those kinds of people, they take children in. I know they're busy people, but they've adopted children. They've fostered children because they seem to love people. My neighbors are the kindest, nicest people. I think they're church people, which scares me. That's how a lot of people think of us. But they're the kindest, most generous people. They can't do enough for me. They mow my yard even when I don't want them to. I work for this guy. That's what they think. I know he's a Christian, which kind of freaks me out. I messed up at work one day, and he called me in. I thought I was going to get fired, but he called me in, and he said, listen, you really screwed up this organization. You really made a big mistake in this company. It cost us a lot in this company, but I want you to know I'm a Christian, and I believe in second chances. And I walked out of that office. I should have been fired, but I kept thinking to myself, what is up with him? What is up with her? What is up with those people who meet together in a room? Can I just say this? I know what's up with you. It's Jesus. Jesus said, I want your good deeds to be so extraordinary, to shine brighter than everyone else, that they begin to give credit not to you, but to God. And listen, I got to say this. Some of you are really great at this. Others of you, I think, are just happy that you're going to heaven. And Jesus said, no, you're the salt, you're the light. And listen, those first century Christians, those first followers of Jesus, man, they got after this. History tells us that they literally took children who had been abandoned and discarded and literally brought them into their own homes. History tells us that when a plague would attack a certain village or a certain town, most people would flee. Even the pagan priests who were supposed to be there for the people would flee because they knew the severity of the plague. They'd seen things happen before. Everybody left, but the Christians, history tells us that the Christians stayed. And they literally nursed people that they didn't know to the point of death. They knew that they probably wouldn't make them better. They barely knew them. They knew there was a difficulty with the plague. They even lost a lot of their own lives. And people began to ask questions, what's up with those people? They noticed that these followers of Jesus, they weren't afraid to die. They knew something about the other side of death. They weren't afraid of death because they lived their lives in such a way that even a pagan Greek or Roman community began to take notice. And literally in just a few years, the world was turned upside down. And let me just say this, not because of good teaching, but because of powerful living. Men and women who took seriously this admonition from Jesus to be the salt and light of the world. And Peter, who was listening in on that day on the mountainside, he grabbed hold of that phrase from Jesus. And years later, after Jesus has gone up into heaven and Christ's followers are being persecuted, in 1 Peter chapter 2, he borrowed the words of Jesus, Peter did, and he said these words, live such a good life among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day that he visits us. Jesus simply says these words, be salt and be light. That's what the good life is. It may be completely different than what you think. Jesus says the good life is to be a preserver of someone else's life. And listen, I know this. As I say all of this to you, you're running this through the filter of your own life. You're trying to figure out, how does this fit into where I live, in my family, where I work, with my job, what my boss is going to think of me? But let me just ask you to do this. Run this through the filter of your own story. The only reason that you're a follower of Jesus is because someone else chose to be the salt and light in your life. They didn't necessarily mean to be, perhaps, or even know that they were being the salt and light. They were just strategically placed in your life. They were just trying to be what they thought they should be, and you took notice of them because they were convinced of Jesus. And God brought that person, him or her, along at just the right time of your life, and God brought that Christian neighbor into your neighborhood, and you started going to their church. God brought that individual who you've been praying that your husband would think more seriously about his faith, and God brought that person into their life. God brought that youth sponsor into your child's life at just the right time when they were starting to make decisions that would turn away from Christ. God brought that boss into your life. God brought that friend into your life. God put them right there at that very strategic moment, just the right time. And if you don't walk out of here with anything else that I've said, just remember this. Salt always preserves. Light always shows the way. Like whatever the environment is, wherever the environment is, salt always preserves. Light always shows the way. And you'll do your best to make excuses. Joe, I don't have any influence. No one notices me. I'm just a ninth grader at school. I can't even find my locker. My place of business doesn't let me talk about religious things. Matter of fact, the environment or the culture at my industry is actually kind of crude. I'm just telling you, don't participate with them. Preserve them. Salt always preserves. Light always shows the way. You have no idea who's going to look back on a particular interaction that you have at the office, at school, at the gym, at hospital, at Walmart. We have no idea who literally is on the verge of a breakthrough in their life simply because you're choosing to be the salt and light of the world. And we may never know their story. We may never know the end of their story. We may never know the impact of our salt and light. But here's what you can be convinced of. Salt always preserves. Light always shows the way. Maybe you and I should ask God, pray to God, God, make my salt more effective, my light more effective. And when God answers that prayer, be prepared. Because who knows what God will do in your family? Who knows what God will do in our community? Who knows what God's going to do in our city? Who knows what God's going to do in our nation? Who knows what God can do globally? Who knows what God can do literally in a church? Listen, the Christian life, my prayer for you is that you would be convinced that the Christian life is the good life. Let me pray for you. God in heaven, this is so easy for me to stand up here and say these words, but it's so hard for this church to do. It's so hard for us to be convinced that this is what you are asking of us, God. God, to convince people of what they really are. God, would you just give us courage to be the salt and the light? Would you just give us courage to speak up when we need to speak up? God, would you encourage us to do good things in your name and to give you all the credit? God, would you just preserve our community because of the salt and light that you've given to us? God, would you just preserve the families that are here? Some are coming back to church that haven't been to church for a while. God, some need to find you for the very first time. Father, there's probably someone in here who was salt and light to a friend and they brought him to church today. God, would you allow this to not just be words, but to become life? Father, I thank you for the good life that you've asked us to live. I pray that you find us faithful to the task based on your faithfulness to us. It's in your Son's name I pray. Amen.